The Spoken Book presents Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Chapter 1. A squat grey building of only 34 stories. Over the main entrance, the words Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Centre, and in the shield, the World State motto Community, Identity, Stability. The enormous room of the ground floor faced towards the north. Cold for all the summer beyond the panes, for all the tropical heat of the room itself, a harsh thin light glared through the windows. Hungrily seeking some draped lay figure, some pallid shape of academic goose flesh, but finding only the glass and nickel and bleaky shining porcelain of laboratory. Winteriness responded to winteriness. The overalls of the workers were white, their hands gloved with the pale corpse-colored rubber. The light was frozen, dead, a ghost. Only from the yellow barrels of the microscopes, and it did borrow a certain rich and living substance lying along the polished tubes like butter, streak after luscious streak in long recesses down the word tables. "And this," said the director, opening the door, "is the fertilizing room." Bent over their instruments, 300 fertilizers were plunged. As the director of hatcheries and conditioning entered the room, in the scarcely breathing silence, the absent-minded, soliloquizing hum or whistle of absorbed concentration, a troop of newly arrived students, very young, pink and callow, followed nervously, rather abjectly at the bent over their instruments. 300 fertilizers were plunged. As the director of hatcheries and conditioning entered the room, in the scarcely breathing silence, the absent-minded, soliloquizing hum or whistle of absorbed concentration, a troop of newly arrived students, very young, pink and callow, followed nervously, rather abjectly at the director's heels. Each of them carried a notebook in which, whenever the great man spoke, he desperately scribbled. Straight from the horse's mouth. It was a rare privilege. The D.H.C. for Central London always made a point of personally conducting his new students round the various departments. "Just to give you a general idea," he would explain to them. For of course, some sort of general idea they must have, if they were to do their work intelligently. Though as little of me, if there were to be good and happy members of the society as possible. For particulars, as everyone knows, make for virtue and happiness, generalities are intellectually necessary evils. Not philosophers, but Fred Sawyers and stamp collectors compose the backbone of the society. "Tomorrow," he would add, smiling at them with slightly menacing geniality, "you will be settling down to serious work. You won't have time for generalities. Meanwhile, it was a privilege. Straight from the horse's mouth into the notebook, the boy scribbled like mad. Tall and rather thin but upright, the director advanced into the room. He had a long chin, big, rather prominent teeth, just covered when he was not talking. By his full floridly curved lips, old, young, 30, 50, 55, it was hard to say, as anyhow the question didn't arise. In this year of stability, AF 632, it didn't occur to you to ask it. "I shall begin at the beginning," said D.H.C. And the more zealous students recorded his intentions in their notebooks. "Begin at the beginning. These," he waved his hands at the incubators, and opening an insulated door, he showed them racks upon racks of numbered test tubes, the weak supply of ova kept he explained. At blood heat, whereas the male gametes. And here he opened another door. There have to be kept at 35 instead of 37. Full blood heat sterilizes. Ram wrapped in thermogene beget no lambs. Still, learning against the incubators he gave them while the pencils carried indelibly across the pages. A brief description of the modern fertilizing process spoke first, of course, of its surgical introduction, the operation undergone voluntarily for the good of society. Not to mention the fact that it carries a bonus amounting to 6 months' salary, continued with some account of technique for preserving the existed ovary alive and active developing, passed on to a consideration of optimum temperature, salinity, viscosity, referred to the liquor in which the detached and ripened eggs were kept, and leading his charges to the work tables, actually showed him how this liquor was drawn off from the test tubes, how it was led out drop by drop onto the specially warmed slides of the microscopes, how the eggs which it contained were inspected for abnormalities, counted and transferred to a porous receptacle. How? And he now took them to watch the operation. This receptacle was immersed in a warm bouillon containing free swimming spermatozoa at a minimum concentration of 100,000 per cubic centimeter. He insisted. How after 10 minutes the container was lifted out of the liquor and its contents re-examined. How, if any of the eggs remained unfertilized, it was again immersed, and if necessary, yet again, how the fertilized ova went back to the incubators, where the alphas and betas remained until definitely bottled under the gammas, deltas, and epsilons, were brought out again, after 36 hours to undergo Bokanovsky's process. Bokanovsky's process, repeated the director, and the students underlined the words in their little notebooks. 1 egg, 1 embryo, 1 adult novelty. But a Bokanovsky-fied egg will bud, will proliferate, will divide from 8 to 96 buds, and every bud will grow into a perfectly formed embryo. And every embryo into a fully sized adult, making 96 human beings grow where only one grew before. Progress. Essentially, the D.H.C. concluded, Bokanovskification consists of a series of arrests of development. We check the normal growth, and paradoxically enough, the eggs respond by budding. Response by budding, the pencils were busy. He pointed. On a very slowly moving band, a rack full of test tubes were entering a large metal box. Another rack full of emerging. Machinery fainted purred. It took 8 minutes for the tubes to go through, he told them. 8 minutes of hard x-rays being about as much as an egg can stand. A few died. Of the rest, the least susceptible divided into 2. Most put out 4 buds, some 8. All were returned to the incubators, where the buds began to develop. Then, after 2 days, were suddenly chilled and checked. 2, 4, 8. The buds in their turn budded, and having budded, were dosed almost to death with alcohol. Consequently, burgeoned again, and having budded, bud out of, were thereafter further arrest being generally fatal, left to develop in peace. But which time the original egg was in fair way to become anything from 8 to 96 embryos. a prodigious development. You will see born nature, identical twins, but not in piddling twos and threes as in the old viviparous days, where an egg would sometimes accidentally divide, actually by dozens, by scores at the time. Scores? The director repeated and flung out his arms as though he was distributing largesse. Scores! But one of the students were fool enough to ask where the advantage lay. My good boy, the director wheeled sharply round at him. Can't you see? Can't you see? He raised his hand. His expression was solemn. Bokanovsky's process is one of the major instruments of social stability. Major instruments of social stability.